My name is Jeffrey Ogbonna Green Ogbar, also known as Jeffrey O.G. Ogbar. I'm a professor of history at the University of Connecticut in Storrs. I was born in Los Angeles, born in Chicago, but raised in LA. So when I tell people I'm originally from Los Angeles, I have to qualify that with my birth in the Windy City. My family came to Chicago in stages, and I'm a historian, and I'm familiar with the macro history of movement, and my family falls pretty in a very cliche way into some of those patterns. My father's side came up from Louisiana in the early 20th century, actually before the Great Migration, and settled in the south side of Chicago, which is the only part where black people could live in the city. They could not buy homes in Marquette or Cicero or other places. And they were they were part of a small but growing group of African Americans in the city. And in the 1940s, my mother's side came to Chicago, and they came from Mississippi. They had less resources. They had fewer resources than my father's side. They had less education than my father's side. And they settled in the same community as my father's side. And my mother's parents and my father's parents at one point lived about 2 blocks from each other, and their children went to McCosh School. And my father, in November of 1954, took a class picture at McCosh School, and his cousin Pete Miller was in the photo, and they had their school year, they had their class photo, and that summer one of their classmates went to visit family in the South, like many people did, and their classmate never came back, and their classmate was Emmett Till. The picture, the last class picture of Emmett Till's, we have in our family possession. My cousin Pete has it, and I have copies of it. And it, in many ways, speaks to these large historical narratives that we're familiar with, but oftentimes our families are repositories of these amazing stories and connections to these really amazing events, these significant historical events. My parents were raised in the 1950s and 60s in Chicago, and they went through the Black Power movement, Civil Rights movement, and they were in some ways affected by it, and they thought about naming their child. When I was born in 1969, in the middle of the Black Power movement, they thought about naming me an African name. And one parent wanted to name me Toussaint Louverture after the revolutionary in Haiti who overthrew the French imperialist agents throughout the island of Hispaniola. And that the name Toussaint Louverture just seemed to resonate with my dad, and thought this would be an appropriate name for his son. And my mother thought the name Bayo, which was a Nigerian name, likely Olubayo, was attached to a larger name, but my mother thought about this Nigerian name. And so my parents went back and forth between names, one French, one Yoruba, and one with a sort of encoded with a particular political meaning, the other with another political meaning. But when I was born, I looked just like my father. And my paternal grandmother looked at this little baby and said, "Jeffrey, that little boy looks just like you." So I became Jeffrey Anthony Green Jr. And the interesting thing is that I eventually changed my name to an African name. My last name, Ogbar, is a Nigerian name. From my mother's side, it's traced its ancestry. All these things to this African name. The thing which is fascinating about what I'm saying is that so much of what I'm talking about inspired me to become a historian. So my personal narrative is a narrative that, like everyone's personal narrative, is attached to history. So your narratives are attached to various histories. In your families, your communities, your parents, your grandparents, movement, challenges, all sorts of things. And naming, right? All these things are attached to history. And for me, the Black Power movement, when I was in college, I went to Morehouse College, and at Morehouse College, in the late 1980s, early 1990s, the political landscape started to shift, and there was a palpable celebration of blackness in a way that I had never seen in the years throughout my teenage years. And Black Power as a historical moment was quite fascinating to me, and when I decided to pursue a PhD in history, I wanted to do my dissertation on the Black Panther Party. Eventually, my dissertation was on the Nation of Islam and the Black Panther Party and the way in which these two organizations shaped the Black Power movement, which is generally defined as this movement that emerged in 1966, and its decline is marked largely in the mid-1970s, around 1975. And there are a few events that sort of might be the bookends of the Black Power movement. The beginning would be the Meredith March Against Fear in June of 1966, when SNCC workers and Congressional Racial Equality workers in Mississippi make this call for Black Power. And then you have all these aesthetic examples of Black Power: natural hair, dashikis, you have clothes, you have songs, music, arts, literature, you name it, plays, murals, all these things affected, but also grassroots activism from Los Angeles to New York, Miami to Seattle. African Americans were involved in various forms of resistance to oppression, and Black Power became this sort of this connective tissue between these various Black communities. And whether it's talking about prisons or universities, Black Power was there also. Professional societies, Black Power was there. And Black Power, in my first book, I explained just how ubiquitous Black Power was in shaping the political, social, and cultural world of African Americans for a period of time. Also, what's important is that the Black Power that we study had a particular legacy that we live with today, that is so common, whether even calling people of African descent Black, but also Black student unions, Black cultural centers, African American studies programs, or now Africana studies programs. All these are institutional legacies of Black Power. So many scholars, my first book came out in 2004, and a new edition in 2019, Black Power, Radical Politics, and African American Identity with Johns Hopkins University Press. A number of scholars have come out. There are so many books on Black Power now and facets of the Black Power movement, whether we're talking about the arts or TV or women in various capacities. And the Black Power movement now, one historian, Peniel Joseph, argues that there is something, a veritable Black Power studies. The corpus of literature is so vast. So I'm happy to be part of this group of scholars who have interrogated Black Power in all sorts of really creative ways.